Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone is having an amazing Thursday. So, today we are going to get into the next 4 chapters of the book by the Girls of Summer. Watch the Obsession just did chapters 1 through 4, and I went ahead and got the book. And don't mind my visuals, okay? I had to take like clips and just put them together, and this is my first shot at really editing. So don't mind me if they don't like add up with the story. I did the best I could, and it's just pretty much 4 visuals, but the story is what's important. And I want to know your comments. You guys left a lot of good comments on the last ones, and the book's pretty good and I'm glad I ordered it. So before we get into it, I want to thank my members a lot, and I want to thank my returning subscribers as well. I could not do this without you, truly. And if you are new here, I would suggest first that you go back and watch the last video that I did on Watch the Obsession, the first 4 chapters of this book, because it was pretty good. And that way you can get caught up to watch this one. So let's get into it. And if you also are new here, just if you could hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you know when we upload new videos. And let's get into it, guys. Please leave me your comments below. I read them all, and I love all your comments, guys. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so we are now on chapter 5. Starts. This apartment hunting demand must have raised the stress levels in a man who was already plenty stressed as it was. There was a whole unwanted life and baby thing, his first unsuccessful murder attempt, the looming foreclosure on his house, the question of what to make for lunch, and now this, find an apartment this week? Even a low-functioning individual like Chris Watts must have wondered how Nicky thought he could pay for an apartment on top of trying to pay the mortgage on his existing house until that house was sold. Nicky's reasoning for this so helpful suggestion was that the Colorado's real estate market was so hot that Chris needed to look for an apartment she had found for him the very week that he returned from North Carolina. Yeah, okay, people do love Colorado, and it maintains a good seller's market, but it's not like you list your place, sell it 20 minutes later, go into escrow, and you are out in a week. I can't believe that once again, seemingly fanboy Kevin Kovac of the CBI let that ridiculous statement slide. Given that this was the nutty reasoning even by Nicky's standards, and I'm sure it must have even puzzled the not-too-bright Chris Watts, too. Golly, he must have thought, why is Nicky asking me to look at apartments? She knows what's going on. She knows I haven't even told Shanann yet. And I mean, Nicky is, like, really smart. I know that, but why does she want me to rent an apartment this week when we haven't even put the house yet up for sale? Did the ultra-imaginable Chris Watts perhaps push back against the suggestion, or this is when the decision was made that this is getting super complicated. Maybe it would be easier to kill everyone. Well, if I've got regrets, and I do, I'm sure Cindy Watts has even more of them, and I hope D.A. Rourke and company have a few of them too. I highly doubt it. I know Chris Watts has regrets because he hates being in prison, and he now blames everything on Nichol Kessinger's influence and sometimes alleged involvement. What does Nicky regret? Does she regret getting involved with a married man and her subsequently ruined life? Well, maybe this is all she regrets. There doesn't appear to be anything convincing evidence from the CBI sessions beyond a token, how could he, that the death themselves bothered her. She couldn't even bring herself to use the victims' names. And if the deaths really didn't bother her, then her actions and words prior to the deaths would probably not keep her awake at night, either, nor anything she may have done or said subsequently. What will no doubt rank with her sister is her bothersome present of having to remain in hiding as one of America's most hated, but that isn't regret, it's petulance, maybe an emotion she and Chris Watts had truly shared in common. There's a saying, life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. Do Nicky and Chris understand this? Do they even look backwards, except to wonder why they didn't get away with it? Does he ever wonder how she evaded all scrutiny? Wait, I think I can attempt to answer that one. If anything, Chris Watts is reported to have told his cellmates, if true, then, according to him, Nichol Kessinger killed the girls, and also, according to him, he still doesn't want her doing any time for it. Something he and D.A. Rourke at the time seemed to share in common. Strangely, when the Colorado detectives visited him at Wisconsin prison, Chris Watts told them that he felt like God was giving him an out the night before the murders. It went like this. Chris told Shanann on Saturday, August 11th, when she was suffering in Phoenix from the poisoning, the heat, and lack of money, that he was going to Colorado Rockies baseball game the next day, which he had no intention of doing. And then a friend from work offered him actual tickets to the Broncos football game, which he refused because it clashed with Nichol Kessinger's offering him something even better, sex. From then, Chris Watts surmised that if he had just gone to the Broncos game, he wouldn't have killed everybody. I don't know how he came to this idiotic conclusion or why he thinks God was involving himself in any of this, but I must admit that during Peyton Manning years, it did seem rather that God was on the side of the Broncos' defense. But beyond that, as I don't tend to credit or blame my own poor decisions or occasional good ones on God's intervention, I find it a bit of a puzzler. But if he really believes what she says, the true puzzler is why God didn't subsequently intervene to make Chris pull over on the trip from his home to Survey 319 on the morning of August 13th to let Bella out of his car or his accomplice's car instead of continuing to lead her to the fate at the killing field. Chris's insistence that God was really trying to give him an out by flourishing some Broncos tickets in his face must mean that Chris considers himself something of a VIP in the spiritual world. And according to Chris, God does not intend to love him just deeply despite everything. He has forgiven him for all his crimes, and he supports Chris continuing Christian ministry at Dodge Correctional in Wisconsin. However, what even God was ultimately unable to do was protect Chris from the works and guile of the devil, and specifically from the honeyed words of that Jezebel, Nichol Kessinger, who drove him to murder his entire family in the most brutal of ways, or maybe did it all by herself. But out of that darkness, he has now emerged into the light as Chris the Evangelist. Unfortunately, this is chapter 6, sorry. Unfortunately, Chris didn't accept his mother's offer to accompany him back to his home in Colorado to look after the girls, and he didn't tell Nichol Kessinger to back off, not even a little bit. Nor did he tell Shanann he wanted out. Instead, he brought her and the children back to Colorado, presumably to kill her and maybe them, if necessary. I can't think of any other possible reason for him to insist on them returning home. Wouldn't it have been so much easier for Shanann and the girls to stay where they were in North Carolina, and for Chris to clean up afterwards his affairs in Colorado, sell the house, agree to a divorce, etc.? That way, they wouldn't even be homeless if he decided not to kill them after all. Remember the following facts. Chris Watts was in constant contact with his mistress, Nichol Kessinger. After Shanann and the girls left for North Carolina, he was also in constant contact with her throughout his stay in North Carolina. And not one single detective ever bothered to ask, "Where'd you get the drugs, Chris?" It didn't even matter that he had poisoned Shanann, and that he had planned this for weeks. That he had flown out across the country cradling deadly narcotics, and that he had confessed all to his parents. No, once he had confessed to the murders, nothing else seemed to have mattered. Christopher Watts had pled guilty to 5 counts of murder in the first degree, 3 counts of tampering with the deceased body, and 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy. And that was until he moved from a prison in Colorado to a nicer one in Wisconsin. And it suddenly occurred to the investigating detectives that there were a few holes in his testimony, but none of them Nichol Kessinger sized. They never asked whether Nichol Kessinger had been involved in any of the murders. We all had to wait for Chris to tell the other Sherilyn Cadle and his cellmate Dylan Tallman about all that, allegedly. 5 counts of murder? You may be wondering, and you are right. I'm no math genius, but I can count to 5. Chris Watts murdered 3 people, but was charged with 2 additional counts of first-degree murder for the girls. At first, I didn't understand those additional charges, but the state of Colorado does indeed charge people twice for the killing of a child under the age of 12. Well, no arguments from me on that one, except I think it's strange that killing a child 12 and up merits only one count. So murdering Shanann got him charged with one count of murder in the first degree, and murdering the girls got him 2 counts each, which equals 5 in all. Got it. Then there are 3 counts of tampering with dead bodies. Got that too. There were 3 bodies, if you don't count Nico's. Don't worry though, because Nico would get his turn when they also charged Chris Watts with the unlawful termination of a pregnancy. That carries with it a massive 48-year maximum sentence in Colorado. Wow! And Colorado is a blue state. That number should put the fear of God and prison into anyone who illegally terminates a pregnancy, whatever the state's politics. Gosh, I do so hope that got included in Nikki's immunity deal, because otherwise she must be sweating bullets if she had any involvement in this. Oh wait, my bad, no one in the authority cares about any of this bit. They don't care that Nikki helped plan either of the attempted murders of Shanann Watts. They don't care if she obtained the opiates Chris Watts used to kill Shanann. They don't care if she was involved in planning the actual murders of Shanann, Bella, Cece, or participated in those murders. And they don't care if she helped Chris dispose of the bodies. So why would they care if she conspired with Chris to abort Nico? As it happens, the opiates that Nichol Kessinger may have obtained in Colorado for Chris to use on Shanann in North Carolina didn't kill Shanann or Nico, but I believe they did kill Cece on the night of Sunday, August 12th, and Chris put them in Bella and Cece's milkshake. Cece, being greedy or more likely funny, got more than her fair share of those opiates when she drank some of Bella's milkshake too. So that Cece was also smaller, died, and Bella woke up to face an even worse fate a few hours later. You may say that Nichol Kessinger definitely did not murder Shanann or terminate her pregnancy, but if she bought the opiates Chris administered to Shanann, knowing what Chris was going to do with them, then she certainly conspired to commit murder, and this would be a federal crime as the attempt was committed across state borders, because Chris flew with opiates from Colorado to North Carolina. Does Nikki have federal immunity in this case too? Maybe. Another puzzler is how the Weld County cops got Chris Watts to agree to a plea deal on 5 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. According to his first confession to having killed Shanann, he killed her in a fit of rage after he saw her murdering the girls. That would be second-degree murder, not first-degree. He then said he killed Shanann in a fit of rage and then snapped and killed the girls in their beds without planning anything beforehand. That would have also been second-degree murder, not first-degree. Yes, his plea deal states that all the deaths were indeed premeditated by him, but that is not what he has said, and I'm positive he would never have said anything like that in a trial either. He admitted premeditation in his letters to the author Sherilyn Cadle, which he later refuted, but their correspondence took place long after the signed plea deal. He also confessed to the premeditation to the Weld County cops during their visit to his Wisconsin prison many months after the plea deal was signed. But this is the only premeditation in respect to the deaths of the girls after they came back to life, from his first attempt to kill them in the second degree. He then continued to assert that he strangled Shanann only in a fit of rage, and that would be a second-degree offense. The new confession not only took place long after he signed the plea deal, but it was also untruthful, as he never attempted to smother or strangle both of the girls in their beds. Now, I realize that the plea deal was based on the premise that he killed the girls, or at least caused their deaths, as he did. That is indisputable. But I can bring up the case of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, Canada's Ken and Barbie killers, again. If you remember, in that case, the Canada authorities used Carla Homolka as their primary witness to nail her lovely husband Paul for raping, torturing, and killing 3 young girls, one of them Carla's own 12-year-old sister. Canada had lots of physical evidence on both of them, but I don't know, maybe they thought a jury might be too stupid to understand it, or perhaps the authorities just don't like trials. Anyhow, they gave Carly Curls a hell of a deal. Tell us what Paul did, and you can go to a minimum security prison for 12 years, adding that the deal was off if her testimony was found to be materially untruthful. Carla did her job and they signed her deal, and she went off to her ladies' jail and took up knitting. But then, oh no, the investigators found some videotapes, and, quell's surprise, there was Charlie Girls right beside Paul, raping and torturing and killing little girls. Eek, how embarrassing. The general public was outraged, and the two families of the murdered girls were naturally upset. Although, interestingly, Carla's parents gave the impression of being okay with their sick psycho daughter being involved in the killing of their youngest child. And you might have expected the Canadian prosecutors would have killed the plea deal on this basis of new evidence, but they didn't. Maybe they didn't fancy the additional paperwork. I don't know. And Carla walked free 12 years later to marry, free to throw up in your mouth here. Feel free to throw up in your mouth here. Sorry. Have a few children of her own and become a stay-at-home mom. In the Chris Watts case, nothing has been subsequently said that caused the state of Colorado to look at Nichol Kessinger's potential involvement in the murders, or no question the coroner's report that said the girls had been smothered or strangled, which they were not. Only Shanann's autopsy showed that she had been strangled. The coroner used Chris Watts' first confession and nothing else to make his ruling on how Bella and Cece were killed. And I'm not sure how anyone except Chris Watts and possibly Nichol Kessinger and me knows how Bella died. Why would anyone, let alone a presumably half-decent coroner, take a killer's word for how someone died, especially when he changes his story every time he opens his mouth? And why did D.A. Rourke accept this finding? If that is how coroners roll, any of us could be coroners. We would get an autopsy order and we would simply ask the suspected murderer how his victim died. They would tell us that it was probably either smothering or strangling, or maybe there was a mountain lion attack, and we would just go, okay, sounds good, and leave the office early enough for a round of miniature golf. Well, I mean, the miniature golf would be my preference. I love miniature golf. But you can fill in how you would spend your extra free time as you wish. The thing is, the autopsy was months before the plea deal. At the time of the autopsy, Chris Watts had said Shanann had either strangled or smothered the girls, and yet there was no proof of that, and no telltale spotting in the eyes caused by smothering or strangling, not on either girl. And there were no neck injuries. Let me break this down. Say a man declares that his wife was killed by a shotgun blast to the head, and the coroner goes, okay, does an autopsy and finds no bullet holes, but a lot of stab wounds. Should he maybe go to the cops and district attorney and say, this isn't how it went down, you need to look for a gun? Maybe in the defense, the coroner did just that, and maybe he wanted to test all three bodies for opiates. God knows Chris Watts thought he would. That's why he said, if Shanann has oxy in her, it's because I gave it to her. But they didn't test her for it. At least there is no report of any such test. Chris Watts would have stayed quiet on that. But D.A. Rourke sure knew about Chris Watts feeding Shanann the opiates in North Carolina long before the plea deal. And if it had directed his people to do their jobs, even at the bare minimum standard, shouldn't they have asked Chris Watts where the drugs came from? And mightn't that have completely blown the deal he gave Nichol Kessinger? I wish I could see another reason for ignoring the drugs and where they came from, but I honestly can't think of one. I believe beyond any reasonable doubt, as they say, that Chris Watts killed Cece accidentally. That's being facetious. I hate Chris Watts, that's pretty well established, but I don't think he originally planned to kill the girls. Shanann and Nico, yes, but not the girls. Well, he might have considered it a possibility. Wait, Chris Watts was using his girls to lure Shanann back to Colorado, where he could kill her and Nico, although by the time he gave her the opiates to the girls on the evening of Sunday, August 12th, he probably felt the opiates couldn't kill anyone, having failed to kill Shanann and Nico with them twice already, but giving opiates to a tiny child can easily kill them. And Cece was just 3, and died when Chris probably only meant to knock her out after Shanann was dead, and the body was disposed of. Shanann's disappearance would have looked bad, but potentially there was no body, no crime, And after that, he could have sent the girls back to live with their grandparents to go visit them occasionally. Or never. But there was no need to murder them. He just wanted to be with Nikki, and Shanann had to go to make that happen. But the girls could have remained alive. As for Bella, anyway, you look at her murder, it was premeditated. That he knocked her out with opiates, hoping she would just go to sleep, that was bad enough. And if Bella had been luckier and died like her sister, accidentally, because he wanted his girls, famously light sleepers, not to wake up while he was killing their mother, this is still premeditation, because dead is dead, no matter your weapon, and drugging people is a deliberate act. Whether he tried to kill them with opiates or just knock them out, he killed Cece and could have killed Bella, except it didn't work out that way. As a result, he ended up not only killing Bella but torturing her with a protracted death. Chris Watts spoke about Cece being blue, and I think it shocked him, but he never spoke about Bella being blue. He knew she wasn't dead. And if he wanted her dead, couldn't he have just put a pillow over her face while she was unconscious to give her a painless death? No, he couldn't, because he never wanted to hurt Bella or Cece at all, I believe. Not as a definite plan. I think so often of this 111-minute phone call with Nichol Kessinger the night he killed Shanann, but he was never questioned about it. Why? Nichol was briefly asked about it, but she said she couldn't remember anything that was said after a whole 2 days and suggested that they may have been having phone sex. Damn, that is some long phone sex. But again, she could not recall anything about it, and Chris wasn't even asked. Now, with at least one dead little girl in the house and Shanann on her way home, I'm not buying that they spent any time having phone sex. They were in crisis and had a lot of planning to do. Cece most likely died shortly after her last meal when she drank her whole milkshake and some of Bella's. As Chris Watts also said, she wasn't moving, she was blue. Yep, she did not look like she was asleep. Bella, on the other hand, would have not been blue and would have only appeared dead. Isn't all this what would have logically and have been discussed over 2 hours? What to do next with Bella? There followed, by Chris's account, the murder of Shanann, and then his 45-minute drive to Survey 319 with a living and conscious Bella awaiting her return to be murdered. Are you going to do to me what you did to Cece? As he recalls her asking him, her feet resting on the bodies of her dead mother and baby brother, and with her dead sister propped up beside her, although Chris claimed Cece was still alive. Now there were definite premeditations at that stage, but when he drugged the girls to render them unconscious while he murdered Shanann, I don't think he intended to kill them, although he certainly intended to knock them out using a potentially lethal dose of opiates. So if one or both of them went to die from ingesting those opiates, as Cece did, that would be premeditated murder, and that he fully intended that act and actually ended in death. Now the big question is, did Chris Watts kill Bella single-handed? Was he the only one responsible for her death? Chris Watts could have killed Bella by putting a pillow over her face as she slept, but it seems he couldn't bring himself to do that. He could, and did, drug the girls so that they would sleep, but he did not do, or I have my doubts whether he could have brought himself to kill them deliberately, because he could have killed Bella in a painless way as she slept, and he didn't. I don't think it was in him, and I don't think it was Chris, or at least not him alone, who killed her at Survey 319. Nor do I believe that sweet little girl sat calmly in the death wagon, that Chris Watts' work truck, only opening her mouth once to observe that it smelled bad. No, he could have put her there. On a practical note, she would have screamed bloody murder when he even tried to load her into the truck with their dead bodies. Yes, Cece was far more the vocal of the two girls, but Bella could hold her own in the yelling department. Just look at the old Christmas videos where she totally lost it after seeing Chris Watts dressed as Santa. Not that I blame her, that was terrifying. But imagine how much more terrifying those bodies were. And if she had protested, the neighbors would have heard her, so I don't think it happened that way. I think she was put into another vehicle, one with no bodies in it, either out front by the road at the back of the house that Chris Watts told Weld County detectives all about, but where? As far as we know, no one asked about the neighbors' security footage. And you have to ask, why was that? After all, the neighbors' security camera footage was at the front end of the house and was extremely revealing, as if there was an order that Weld County cops and CBI agents should not look for any evidence that might implicate someone whose cell phone pinged right next to Chris Watts' house around the time he was carrying dead bodies to his car. I am sure that being put in a stranger's car under those circumstances was scary for Bella, but she was a shy, very polite little girl, and while she would have been badly confused, I think that if the driver was a pretty lady, she could have been compliant. Chris Watts has said that Bella asked about the car seats. Okay, she might have. She was always used to riding in them, so this is not out of the realm of reason. And being put into a stranger's car, she might indeed have asked. Why would she have not asked about them if she was being put into her father's work truck, which had the dead bodies of everyone she knew and loved in it? No car seats would have entered her mind, just terror. And I don't think the original plan was ever for an accomplice to come to 2825 Saratoga Trail and help with the murderous mess he had created. His seemingly surprise at ever being questioned, let alone caught, by his wife's friend Nichol Atkinson had always struck me. His actions on the morning of the murders were not those of someone who ever expected to get caught. In fact, it seemed like someone surfing a huge wave of freedom and relief. He texted sunflower pictures to Nicole. He called the girls' school to unenroll them before he supposedly was even aware that Shanann and the girls were missing. And he called his real estate broker and even scrolled Aspen Getaways. Does anyone think that this sounds like someone who didn't think that he had pulled it off? Okay, Chapter 7. I guess that maybe back in 2018 I just thought, wow, this guy is a complete imbecile. How would he have ever thought that anyone on the planet would believe his pregnant wife and two little girls would just wander off down the street? But what if he never thought it would be like that? What if his original plan went something like this? He would poison Shanann and Nico in Shanann's parents' house. Shanann and Nico would die, and the girls would stay forever with Shanann's parents, who would be so grateful to have their granddaughters after the terrible loss of Shanann and Nico that they would do anything they could to be supportive of their grieving son-in-law, who at the time was much loved by them. No one would bat an eye that he would be leaving the girls there. After all, his job was in Colorado, and he would need to return to it. Then, once there, he could file a claim on the life insurance policy that he had on Shanann, catch up with the mortgage arrangements, and sell the big house that no one would expect him to live in on his own with all those crippling, sad memories. North Carolina is a long way from Colorado, and Shanann's parents would have had their hands full with their tiny grieving granddaughters by the time they would hear that Chris Watts had found someone new. And that knowledge could have been hidden from them for years, as Chris would visit the girls from time to time rather than have them visit him. By which time it wouldn't seem odd that he had found someone else. The Ruscheks would probably even have been kind to Nichol Kessinger when she eventually entered the scene. And if Chris Watts never reclaimed the girls would have likely been glad of this. Shanann's family is Italian, kind, loving, and kid-focused, and they are very close to their granddaughters. And if the last 7 years shown anything about the Ruschek family, it's that they are incredibly forgiving people and they do not seek revenge. The Watts family might have guessed that Chris had been seeing someone else all along, indeed. They already suspected that he was seeing someone else on the day after Shanann was first poisoned, but nothing would have been said, as nothing was said. So all Chris and Nikki's mutual appreciation of sunflowers, the getting out of debt-free cards, Aspen vacations, and wedding dresses, what Chris once called gumdrops and lollipops and cheat days, would roll by with no questions asked. Of course, since Shanann didn't die, another plan had to be devised, so that way the girls had to be taken back to Colorado, so Shanann would return with them. Then he gave it the old college try one more time by poisoning Shanann's shake for her to take on the airport for her way to Arizona. But she and Nico didn't die that time either. So it was going to be a much more hastily devised plan. And this one, I'll call it Plan C. Chris Watts would drug the girls and murder Shanann and Nico with his own hands to make sure that it was done right. This was his last desperate shot, probably based on Nichol Kessinger giving him an ultimatum of get rid of Shanann or else. Of course, when she, possibly, insisted that Chris should get rid of Shanann, she may not necessarily have meant that Shanann and Nico should end up sleeping with the fishes. She may have just meant that they should be got out of her way. Anyway, in Chris Watts' Plan C, the girls would sleep through Shanann's murder and the disposal of her and Nico's bodies, which could have worked since her flight was due in at 11 p.m. Kill her, put her and the sleeping girls into the truck, drive to the gravesite, dump her into it, drive back home, ditch the car, and wait for the girls to wake up. He would then declare that they seemed sick and call into work that day to say that he was stuck at home with sick kids and waiting for Shanann to return from wherever she was, having left in a huff, and their massive argument over Chris's desire to be divorced. Then he would spend the rest of the day cleaning up evidence inside the house and the work truck and probably move Shanann's Lexus to an airport parking garage or wherever. Moving the Lexus was the key. After all, it would have looked impossible for Shanann to have vanished without her car. I can say that because it did. If Plan C had gone down that way, then there was no need to withdraw the girls from Primrose School. He could just call them in sick. But of course, it's Chris Watts and everything went wrong. And that is where this 111-minute phone call came into play. Chris Watts had accidentally killed Cece, and now how his Plan C was going to work, I don't know. Bella could tell people about how they ate with Daddy, and then she came and woke up, and Cece was gone, and Mommy never came home. No one would have believed that Cece just disappeared, with or without Shanann. Heck, Chris's father-in-law had FaceTimed the girls that night while they were having dinner, the last time they were seen alive. What was Chris going to do? So he placed a frantic call to Nikki. The following is just me imagining what might have been said. Chris Watts. Hey, Empanada. Nichol Kessinger. Hi. Why are you calling me right now? Isn't she getting home soon? And why is your TV on so loud? Won't it wake the kids up? You said? Chris Watts. Yeah, I know, but Boo, something bad has happened. Nichol Kessinger. I knew it. I knew you weren't going to leave your wife. I knew you couldn't go through with this. Well, let me tell you, Christopher, you can just forget about Chris Watts. No, no, Nikki, I'm still going to do it as soon as she comes home. That's not it. Nichol Kessinger. Then what? And why is your TV so loud? Are the kids awake? Why are they awake? And how is this? Chris Watts. Slow down, Boo. Take a deep breath. Everything will be okay. It's just that, see, well, the kids aren't awake because, well, they aren't awake. Nichol Kessinger. What? You aren't making any sense, Christopher. Chris Watts. I know, I'm not. It's just, well, Cece is dead. And Nichol Kessinger. What? What did you mean, Cece is dead? Oh my God, how? What happened? What did you do? Chris Watts. It was an accident, Boo. Remember how I put Oxy in Shanann's drinks and all that happened was it made her sick? And Nichol Kessinger. Yes, Christopher, I do, but what's that got to do with Chris Watts? I wanted them to go to sleep and not wake up until after Shanann came home and I had killed her and then got her body out of here. So I put it in their shakes and oh my gosh, and this is Nichol Kessinger. How much did you use? Jesus, Christopher. Christopher Watts. Boo, please don't be mad at me. I didn't mean for this to happen. Nichol Kessinger. Christopher, I'm not mad. I'm in shock. Did you kill both of them? How much did you use? Chris Watts. I just did the same thing I did with Shanann. I ground them up in the coffee grinder and I put them in their shakes. I don't know. I mean, all that happened with Shanann was she got sick. Well, you know. Nichol Kessinger. Yes, Christopher, but she's a grown woman and overweight, too. Did you think about her body size of the girls, too? And you didn't say a fellow was dead, too. Chris Watts. Yes, I know, I screwed up, okay? And I think Bella is still alive. Cece is blue. I mean, she looks bad. Bella doesn't look like that. Nichol Kessinger. I feel like I'm going to throw up. So where are they now? Isn't your fat wife about to walk in the door? And if she sees this? Chris Watts. No, I know. I already thought about that. I took them down to the basement. They're on My bed down here. I'm washing the sheets right now. Cece is kind of stiff, but Bella wasn't when I carried her down. She hasn't moved, though. Nichol Kessinger. God, Christopher, you have to check. Hold a mirror up to her mouth, I think. I don't know. Go now. Chris Watts. Okay, that's a good idea. Will you stay on the phone with me? I need you. I can't do this without you, Nikki. You know that. You know that. It's all for you. Nichol Kessinger. Oh my God, please stop talking for a minute. I'll stay on the phone. Do you have a mirror? Chris Watts. No, but I know Shanann has a ton of those little makeup thingies in her purses. I'm just going to get into her closet and... Nichol Kessinger. Purses? God, how many does she have? Chris Watts, chuckling. Oh, hang on. I'll get one, and I'll send a picture of this closet you can see for yourself. Nichol Kessinger. I remember. She spends money like water. Okay, are you going to go downstairs now? Chris Watts. Yep, hang on. Oh, good news. Bella is breathing. Nichol Kessinger. Christopher, I'm not sure. I mean, is that good news? What did she see? Chris Watts. She shouldn't have seen anything. They just ate and drank, and I put them on the little couches, and they passed out right away. I mean, Bella did. Obviously, Cece. Nichol Kessinger. Christopher, how are you going to explain Cece being dead? Chris Watts. I've kind of thought about that, and I'm going to say Shanann killed her. Nichol Kessinger. Why would she do that? Chris Watts. What do you mean? I mean, I'm going to say we had a fight, and she killed Cece. And Nichol Kessinger. That makes 0 sense. Chris Watts. What do you mean? Why? Shanann has a really bad temper. Everybody knows that, even her mom and Nichol Kessinger. I mean, why would Shanann kill Cece and not Bella? And Christopher. They are going to do an autopsy. They will find the oxy, and they could probably figure out that Cece has been dead a while. Christopher, I think you are going to have to do something about Bella. Chris Watts. I can't. Nichol Kessinger. Well, you're going to have to do something, Chris. Chris Watts. I can't. Nichol Kessinger. Then what do you want to do? What do you think will happen? Obviously, this dialogue is only my attempt to reconstruct how that conversation may have gone. But whatever was said at first, it continued on for nearly 2 hours. A conversation so important and absorbing that Chris Watts didn't even check incoming calls or texts from Shanann, something you would think would have been pretty important to him considering he was planning to kill her sometime after she landed at 11 p.m. Wasn't he at all curious about her movements, or was the disaster that had just taken place all too consuming for him that he didn't even think about Shanann's timeline? In this nearly 2-hour desperate no-sex phone call with Nikki, it seems that Chris Watts decided to go with a new hastily pulled-together plan. We'll call this Plan D for dumb. Chapter 8. Okay, let's get this over with. The gruesome death of Bella Watts. Owing to Chris Watts' inability to kill that lovely little girl at her house with his own bare hands, he killed her or let her be killed in a truly awful way, a way that no one, me included, can ever stand to think about. Before I tell you what I think happened, I should add that there was a report from a world-renowned handwriting expert whom I asked to analyze examples of Chris Watts' handwriting back in 2019. What surprised me about the results was the expert said that Chris's handwriting showed no signs of mental pathology whatsoever, and it confused this expert even more when I told him what Chris Watts had admitted to doing. The samples I had given him were unattributed and without context beyond the age and sex of the person who wrote them. His analyses are used in court by major banks, and he gave me a spot-on analysis of the California murderess Betsy Broderick that I added to the republication of Until the 12th of Never by Bella Stumbo when I provided a foreword for it. Indeed, I have heard stories about this particular expert whose analyses have been so accurate as to make him appear psychic, and I'd give a lot to get a handwriting sample from Nichol Kessinger to send to him, but her communication seemed to have been exclusively in speech and text messages. I can't really say what I thought when I got his response that there was nothing sinister in the handwriting he had analyzed. 7 years have passed since then, but I know I shared his findings with Cindy Watts to make her feel better, and I certainly thought that it just didn't make sense. Chris Watts' crimes were so awful that they had been done by someone with severe mental issues at the very least, and almost certainly by a psychopath. Who or what else could do such things? And that was at the heart of America's fascination with this case. If Mr. Nice Guy is a killer psycho, who is safe? And here this handwriting expert was telling me that Chris Watts wasn't even a psychopath or have any identificational mental problems. I'll admit I have to work hard to agree that Chris Watts was ever Mr. Nice Guy. There were just no stories anybody could tell me about him being nice, only the absence of stories about him being horrible, except to his mom. And I didn't think much of her showering with the girls. I didn't think much of his showering with the girls. Now, if Chris Watts was or is a pedophile, the need to cover that up would provide a motivation for him killing the girls and destroying their bodies. He did, after all, seal their medical records, something that still, by the way, makes me think that there was evidence of abusive acts being made against them. Because why else would he have done that? Maybe to hide the oxy in their system? Another thing I have had problems with is that a mere 60-day affair could lead to such a sickening slaughter. But see, oops, I took his word for that, and I took Nikki's word too. I didn't think at that time that if Chris Watts wasn't even a psychopath or have any identifiable mental issues, then there might have been someone else who had the strong influence on him, and that they might be. The murders of Shanann, Bella, Cece, Nico were surely the actions of an ice-cold psychopath, someone incapable of any human emotion at all, which meant that Chris Watts would never have cared for his wife or his little girls, that they were just time fillers until something better came along. Okay, that proved to be true because when Nikki came along, they did cease to mean anything to him at all. Shanann was in obvious emotional agony all summer, as he had no fucks to give about that. He was away from his girls for a long time and seemed, if anything, to be glad of having no emotional ties to them. As for Nico, well, he did keep trying to kill him, so his lack of feeling there was somewhat obvious. And yet, we have seen those videos of him with his children. He's an imbecile, not Joaquin Phoenix, an Academy Award-winning actor, and to show that much affection over several years, you must mean something. So what did it mean when his handwriting suggested no mental pathology? It meant that people like me and people like D.A. Rourke and his merry crew wanted to ignore a lot of glaring facts and make the story fit the crime. However, many of you didn't overlook these facts. You saw further, and that's good. Very, very good. Because, on a personal note, it made me look back too. And if there's any justice in this world, if D.A. Rourke cares at all for justice, he too will look back and proceed from there. What if the girl who stole the easily suggestible Chris Watts' breath away, as he said Nichol Kessinger did, is a psychopath, or at least has sociopathic traits? What if she is indeed incapable of feeling anything for anyone? I'm not saying that she is anything like that. I am just conjecturing. But if she is a psychopath sociopath, then nobody has to try to reinvent the psychological wheel to explain the Watts case. She would be a psychopath sociopath, and he would be so weak as to agree to anything she said. It reminds me of Maurice Palog's assessment of Empress Alexandra and Tsar Nicholas, the last sovereigns of Russia, about whom I wrote a book series, that she was insane and that he was weak. Okay, in the interest of fairness, if Nichol Kessinger is not a psychopath sociopath and decides to take a polygraph and MMPI to prove it, then all apologies to her. She is merely a skanky girl who likes to take what doesn't belong to her, and I'm just mean, and D.A. Rourke is a hero to all women everywhere. But in case that none of that occurs, here is what I think happened. And if you want to skip over this, I get it. Do it. You have my blessing. All right, guys, we have to stop here. We did 4 chapters. We're going to do chapter 9 in the next video. And we're going to hear what she thinks happened to Bella. And I promise I will not read on without you guys. And I will try to get the video out by tomorrow. So let me know your comments and everything about these claims. I mean, it kind of makes sense. And I really do want to believe that Cece died in her sleep. But Bella didn't, if that's the case. And just None of them deserved any of this, of course. All right, guys, I will see you in the very next video. Love you guys. Have a wonderful day. Bye.